Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, especially to those of you who abandoned the end of your coffee break to come here and start the discussion. Appreciate it. So at this panel, for the next 60 minutes, we're going to be talking about security in the fragmented world. And before I introduce our great panel, let me paint a picture of the year for you in a couple of sentences. If I had to summarize it, I would say that this year, the world is arming faster, trading less, and trusts almost nobody. Why do we think that? A couple data points for you. If we look at the defense budgets are exploding. They went up globally at about 10% in comparison to the previous year. At the same time, confidence in global institutions, multilateralism, is at the record low. Only 1 in 4 individuals globally trust organizations like UN or regional institutions and think that they will do something good for the world, which is a very low number. At the same time, if you look at the number of active wars and conflicts, it's a record high since 1946, which is, again, a pretty dramatic statement for the past 70 years. But if we look also at economy and trade is technically still expanding. As a whole, the world trades a lot, but only within political comfort zones. So the trade between political allies is going up, but the trade between emergent rival political blocs is going down, and it's already down by 1/5 over the past couple of years alone. So fragmentation is no longer just a risk scenario, it's already a reality that we are living in. But luckily for us, we have a fantastic panel today to discuss these issues. From my left, we have Ambassador Zeki Levent Gyumrukçu, who is currently Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Turkey, but was until last year the permanent representative to NATO and has an immense experience dealing with NATO as an institution. Then we have with us Ambassador Angus Campbell, who is currently Australia's ambassador to Belgium, the European Union, NATO, and Luxembourg. But before that, he served as the Chief of Defense Forces of Australia 6 years prior to his appointment as an ambassador. And we also have with us Professor Jason Lee, who is Director of the ILMI International Relations Institute and Director of the Jean Monnet EU Center of Excellence at Korea University. Professor Lee works a lot on the EU, but also US foreign policy and global institutions as well. We will start with a short warm-up questions for everybody. We talk a lot about fragmentation, but it's very important to understand what it actually means in practice and what's defining this fragmentation, how it makes the world different from what it used to be. So I will go to each of you and ask what it means for you, and maybe what do you fear the most when we talk about fragmentation? And Mr. Minister, I'll go to you first.
Thank you so much. I mean, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. That's my first time in Riga. Definitely not going to be my last time, though, so I really liked it. And it's, of course, a privilege to be on the same panel with Ambassador Campbell and, of course, Professor Lee. In response to your question, in fact, I mean, what you said in your introductory remarks, I mean, I think presents the right picture, really. Because, I mean, I remember when I joined the Foreign Service back in 1990, we were all very hopeful that the post-Cold War was going to produce a more peaceful and democratic world, where the, international order was going to be based on rules, principles, and standards, rather than on a balance of terror, as it used to be during the Cold War. But now, as you have just described, we are even worse off than in the Cold War years, in terms of wars, in terms of the slide back from democracy and such. So, but the net result of that is, and especially, the fact that, the global institutions that we have created over the last 80 years, is, increasingly becoming more ineffective and unfunctional in dealing with those issues, in maintaining peace and security. So the net result is a loss of faith in international diplomacy, of course, which is triggering, also a big risk for the credibility, relevance, and even legitimacy of institutions like the UN. And I think what, of course, the immediate reflexive response of the countries are to look more inwards. I mean, in a way that triggers more protectionism, more transactionalism, and more crude nationalism, unfortunately. I think that is the fragmented world order that I see. I mean, more and more countries are, in fact, losing their faith in international diplomacy and global institutions and trying to take matters into their own hands. But I think we should do precisely the otherwise. Because, I mean, we know by history that, I mean, those kind of crude nationalism, protectionism, and transactionalism never produced anything good, neither for the countries which pursued those methods, nor for the rest of the... So the first thing that comes to my mind in how to deal with that issue is to reform the UN and is to reform the United Nations Security Council. I know it's easier said than done. I worked in the United Nations in our mission to the United Nations 20-some years ago. And guess what? The UN reform was top of the agenda at that point in time. And still it is the case, without any progress being made. But I think we came to a point where we can no longer afford such inertia. Because, I mean, the conflicts today do tend to not stay within their confines of the region and origins. And in fact, even the big powers find themselves in the forefronts of these conflicts and at times in full confrontation with each other. So I think this is the time to look at this issue more seriously and to do something about that. And given the fact that the veto powers of the permanent countries are in fact the core of the problem, I think we have to resist the temptation of increasing the number of members in the Security Council as such, but do something really in order to make the Council more representative, more functional, and more credible. And maybe just one sentence, of course, having said all that, I think regional ownership of our security, and that brings my own NATO experience as well here, is also quite important. Because in the absence of a functioning system, rules-based international order, I think the regional organizations have to step up even more to take more, assume more responsibility. And in that regard, for Europe at least, that means more NATO, that means more OSCE, and that means more EU. But only if and when they realize that Europe is beyond EU and larger than the EU. We need NATO for defense and deterrence. We need OSCE as a pan-European dialogue platform it is for confidence building and everything. And we need EU for its financial capabilities, regulatory authorities, and also for its soft power. So that's what I wanted to say in my introductory remarks. But I'm sure we will come back to many of those
Excellent.
points.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. Indeed, like the most natural instinct right now is to start looking inwardly and try to do whatever you want in your own interest, whereas it's the opposite of what everybody should be doing. But Ambassador, over to you next.
Thank you. There are many similarities in my thoughts with the Vice Ministers, and I go back to the sense of exhaustion and horror at the experience when the Second World War concluded. And much of the world was devastated. People were so determined not to see or allow this to arise again and desired something better. Now, I'm reflecting on great power conflict. I know there have been many wars since 1945 and many regrettable wars since 1945. But the architecture established in the post-war years was all about preventing great power conflict. And it was designed and created by a generation across a breadth of nations who so desired never to go back to that horror. It wasn't perfect, and a lot of countries didn't like it as what they would prefer, but they were prepared to put up with it. It was good enough for enough of us. And so it flourished as the rules-based international order, which allowed an extraordinary growth in human prosperity and opportunity. I think that social restraint, generationally, is not dropping away from the point of view of people suddenly like war, but they are far, far perhaps less conscious of the horror of great power war. And along comes the extraordinary opportunities of technology and also the atomization that is enabled by technology. So you can see a narrowing of interest, a narrowing of historical perspective, and a focusing on the near term or of the local or the specific, rather than the beneficial effects for the community of nations in an international order that is sufficiently good enough for everybody to be engaged in. And I think we're at that point where there is a lot of questioning about the international order, a lot of manoeuvring around it, a lot of distrust generated in it. And in that, we are forgetting that it was our best solution, perhaps least worst solution, to avoiding the horror of 80 million dead.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. You're raising at least two very consequential questions. The first one is whether we can actually transform the world without living through the horror, because that's what it took to design the current system. And of course, the second one, what kind of horror and shock to the system is still required to do that? Because bringing it back home to Europe, there are quite atrocious developments here on the continent, but we still seem not to fully conceptualize that we need to do something about that before it gets much worse. But Professor, over to you next.
Okay, let me join in thanking the organizer, and this is great pleasure and honor to be a part of this Riga conference. Fragmentation. Well, fragmentation today, in my eyes, is what I term the networked instability. The world is connected. The world is still well connected, but less properly governed. It's not ungoverned, but less properly governed. And that comes with our changes, with the changes in our belief system. For a long time, maybe after the Second World War, or especially since 1989, 1990s, we have taken for granted a lot of things. Some principles, sovereignty, international liberal order. But nowadays, that kind of belief is gone. And that's why confidence, people's credibility or confidence in international institutions, or even the neighboring countries and bilateral relations are deteriorating. And so we are living under a huge and big unpredictability, but that unpredictability has become policy. The big power, great powers, now treat volatility itself as leverage to some degree, and forcing the middle power countries of Korea would be an example, but also the Turkey, the Australia, this middle power country to manage a crisis that they did not create. And so, and here, once again, going back to fragmentation, I would raise this question. Are we really fragmented, or the world is fragmenting? So is it ongoing, the procedure, or is already an outcome? Most likely, it seems, well, ing is still going on. It's not yet totally fragmented. We do have the order. We do have and this setting is certainly, well, this is still the converging forces of the world order. Well, that is certainly centripetal. But also there is a huge divergent power, both from the big powers or the multiple theaters and multiple conflict we are witnessing. So the big question is, okay, we have converging forces, we have diverging forces. Which one will over the other? And that will determine, are we being fragmented or fragmenting? So if we have to stop the divergence, then how and who can do that? That will be the major question.
Professor, I really like the way you frame it in terms of there are forces that pull us apart, the forces that pull us together. and also this element of middle powers that you brought in, because to me it seems like the middle powers are the countries who seems to be best positioned to manage both the forces that are pulling us apart and pulling us together. And since we have the panel of middle powers who have all the responsibilities right now, I really want to do a little bit of a dive into your respective regions and see how your respective countries are navigating this from fragmentation, but also divergency and convergency at the same time. Mr. Minister, I'll start with you. Turkey has always been important, but recently, over the past years, it started playing an even more interesting role. At the one side, you're very neatly integrated into Western security alliances, NATO. On the other side, you manage to have pretty workable relations with quite a lot of countries, not just in the region, but also Russia. In many ways, you try to facilitate and be a mediator, be it for the Ukraine grain deal, or sometimes conversations with Syria or other countries in the region. Economically, it's becoming even more complex in terms of the trade flows. While some European countries or your Western allies are cutting sometimes with Russia, your trade remains pretty significant and stable in many ways. How do you handle all these divergent forces pulling in different directions, and what's your strategy in navigating them?
You're right. In fact, we haven't started doing that lately. Since the end of the Cold War, this was our foreign policy, really, a multivectoral, a 360-degree approach to security in all four directions around us. In fact, we have been telling our allies that, the world, unfortunately, is not becoming the peaceful and the democratic place that we all hoped for in the post-Cold War period. That the so-called peace dividend that we all, of course, were quite hopeful, should not lead us to complacency in terms of our defense and security readiness. We were telling that, we have to continue to invest our defense and deterrence capabilities. That we have to be able to look to security from a 360-degree approach. And we also have to be able to reach out in this globalized world where things are not black and white, need to be able to reach out to our partners and even sometimes our adversaries to try to find the common grounds and to try to maintain the channels of communication. And that's exactly what we have been doing. And I think most of our allies are also waking up to that. And this is really the case to do. And NATO, for example, over the last 5 to 10 years, especially after the adoption of our strategic concept, of course, really started looking at our defense and deterrent capabilities in a much more serious manner. And now we're trying to revitalize our defense industry bases. We're trying to also, tighten the cooperation schemes among ourselves as well, but also trying to reach out to our partners in all directions, like, for example, the Asia-Pacific partners or our partners to the south. Just a year ago, for example, we have come up within NATO with a new action plan reflecting on our relationship with the countries in Northern Africa and in the Middle East. So I think Turkey has been doing the right thing for some time. And yes, of course, it puts us in difficult situations time to time, as to what need to do. But this is, of course, that comes with the package. You have to make those hard and bold decisions as they come. But when you have a principled approach, what I am telling is, multivectoralism is not neutrality or is not impartiality. Of course, we are guided by some principles, standards, and values, but we are trying to, find the practical value of, dealing with different countries in different formats. And sometimes, of course, we, had this dialogue going on with certain countries. At the same time, we had some serious problems with them in different theaters. So this is the kind of way that we are trying to do. First of all, investing in our own defense and deterrence capabilities, having a principled position on these issues, and not shying away from, pronouncing this position with different actors as well, and trying to find the common ground to the extent possible. And of course, you said that, even, for example, in a war like Ukraine, from the very outset, we condemned the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We have, of course, committed ourselves politically, economically in support of Ukraine, but also we maintained our channels of communication with Russia as well, which brought some very important initiatives to the benefit of not only the Ukrainians, but to the whole world. Black Sea Grain Initiative, for example, helped us avert the global food crisis at that time. So this is the, kind of mentality that we approach to foreign policy at this point in time, in a more wider, multivectoral, but still in a very principled way.
And Ambassador, I'm really, because you've been a permanent representative to NATO for a few years, and as you mentioned, Turkey has held this position for quite some time, especially over the past years. Was it difficult to explain this position to NATO partners? And do you feel like now the entire NATO is moving more towards your thinking than before?
I'll give a short answer to that. Yes.
Tell us.
It was difficult. It was difficult for a very short while, but I think people started understanding us much better over the last few years. That's what I'm going to tell.
What is still not understood? Which issue are you still struggling to explain?
Depends, of course. I don't think you can generalize that. This part of what we are trying to do in our own region, in our wider neighborhood, I think, it's a case-by-case, approach. In every single situation, there are certain things which are difficult to understand and appreciate at the outset. But that's why we have NATO. NATO for us is not just a military alliance. It's also the ultimate transatlantic policy consultations forum where we can get together with all our 31 allies, but also with our partners from different corners of the world and discuss these things in a very honest manner. So that is, I think, the best value of NATO. And that is where, of course, we first maybe start from diverging points of view, but at the same time, every time, at the end of the day, we reach a consensus.
Excellent. Let's move to partners across the world. Ambassador, let's zoom a little bit on Indo-Pacific, but also Australia specifically. Australia is also a very interesting case, especially for Europeans, when we try to understand how to merge our understanding of security with this reality of trade and economic relations, depending on where you are in the world. And Australia is a great case because on the one hand, you are very deeply integrated also in the Western security infrastructure and actually going deeper and deeper into this integration. On the other hand, China is your largest trading partner, if I check the numbers correctly, and that seems to be working well for you. At the same time, we know that Indo-Pacific is becoming one of the most contested regions in the world. Can you guide us a little bit through your thinking from the position of Australia, how you're thinking about it?
Sure. Australia, like I think any country, is most influential and most perhaps actively present in its nearer region. But that doesn't mean it's absent elsewhere. And Australia has had a very long history of engagement throughout the world. And one that I think is both based on values and interests and with many like-minded partners. Because we do believe in a multilateral world in which middle and small powers can depend on rules to assure themselves of their future and their opportunities and their prosperity. The fragmenting question is all about the fragmenting of the opportunities of multilateralism for everybody, and the less clear relationship between a community of rules and a hierarchy of power. We have relationships in Europe, in North America, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific, in North Asia. And yeah, we have a wide trading relationship. For anyone who is looking for critical raw materials, we have them. We'd like to sell them to you. Okay.
You are buying.
Yeah, exactly. Great friend in Korea. And one of those countries with whom we have a very significant trading relationship is with China. It is our largest trading partner. China has a trading relationship, I'm told, with about 100 to 140, depending on how you count it, countries see China as their largest trading partner. And China, of course, is an emerging, it is a great power which is emerging more powerfully. And that can cause some security anxiety in the Indo-Pacific. It has a worldview and a perspective on some issues across the Indo-Pacific that cause concern or expressions of variance in that view. You could look at the tension in the Scarborough Shoal between China and the Philippines as an example of a great power expressing its worldview of interests and a middling power seeking to acknowledge the Arbitral Commission's finding of its rights in the Scarborough Shoal. So it's a complex space. It's a complex region. We don't believe you can ever have too many friends. We always like, as a country, to work together with others because we believe that that is the best way to solve problems. And we don't believe in not talking to those who have a different view, but rather to seek the variety of mechanisms and modalities to engage, to use diplomacy and use as many mechanisms that might build a consensus or see the management of a tension or an issue, which might not be resolved, but managing it is a whole lot better. And I think that the South Koreans would probably agree that managing the relationship with the North Koreans is better than what could otherwise be a terrible conflict on that peninsula. So we're an active participant in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, in South Asia, and wherever our interests are engaged. And we believe that the multilateral system is worth supporting, worth shoring up, worth seeking to reinforce wherever that possibility remains, because fragmenting is not fragmented, it is not over, and we have agency.
You're now in Brussels and trying to explain this complexity to Europeans. Do we here understand the complexity of the region well? And if you said that there is one thing that we do not properly understand here in Europe yet, what would that be?
Look, I don't presume to suggest what you do or don't understand in Europe. I will offer you a question that I hope just piques your curiosity, and that is, do you know what is the single, the number one, the overwhelming security concern of the Pacific Island nations?
Climate?
Climate change.
Climate change.
It is existential. If that was not immediately on the forefront of your mind, then I encourage you to keep exploring the Indo-Pacific. It is an extraordinarily diverse, rich, wonderful place, and it's part of a world that is deeply interconnected. What happens there will influence Europe, where 40% of your trade flows. What happens in Europe will absolutely influence what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. And I think our collective determination to remain curious and to remain engaged is the best way to approach solving problems together.
Thank you so much. I really love the framing. There is no such thing as too many friends. So let's move to our friends from South Korea. Professor, for me, South Korea was always a very interesting place to look at when we talk about discussions about the change in world order, because in many ways, some of the situations you're facing right now with the North Korea, it's still the remnant of the Cold War. But we also see that some of the rules and mechanisms for stability from the Cold War are evaporating. How are you handling this situation? And maybe from the point of view of South Korea, how are you looking for new friends? Because you can never have too many in terms of trying to establish new alliances, new combinations of partners to work on the specific security issues that you are having?
Well, having many friends is very important. Well, going back to 1950, when Korea actually had a Korean War, well, a lot of friends actually came to Korea to join the Korean forces. Well, the Korea shares actually, especially when I'm coming to the Baltic state or in Poland or in the eastern flank of NATO, I feel a lot of similarities of security environment, because Korea is having a constant threat. Korea is living with a constant threat from North Korea. The city of Seoul is only like 100 kilometers from DMZ, so it's just an hour from DMZ, and we have China, and we have Russia. So, but
Seems worse, actually.
yeah, and Korea is technically South and North Korea. They are under the truce agreement. The war did not end. So, so yes, we are still living in the Second World War, the legacy, and I thought, well, that was very unique and peculiar case in the war. But since 2022, since the February of 2022, actually the clock of the world geopolitics went back to the Second World War period. This is like 1945, and it was the Yalta when the Korean Peninsula was divided. And that is nowadays the Crimea and the Ukraine. So, well, security is certainly connected, but have to keep in mind that Korea has a lot of Korea has a strong alliance with the United States. Well, that will be the backbone of Korea's security. And during past few years, Korea has built a trilateral partnership between U.S., Japan, and Korea. And nowadays, Korea is very active. Well, Korea has been invited several times to the G7 summit as an observer. And also Korea joined NATO plus AP4 or IP4 in the Pacific for the Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand for the past 3 consecutive years. This year, the 3 leaders from the in the Pacific country did not attend by themselves. They sent the delegate. So Korea is trying to outreach, trying to engage in a much broader security network. But Korea's dilemma is, yes, certainly, Korea will be happy to be a responsible the partners of this free world. Well, no doubt about it. But at the same time, we have to adeptly manage the risk of China and Russia and North Korea. We certainly have to keep a certain line. We are already actually under we are stepping on the red line. And managing the temperature and avoiding the extreme escalation of tension will be another huge round of geopolitical concern. So Korea, as a major economy in the world, and Korea's GDP is actually is equivalent to Russian GDP. And yes, Korea is a major economy, and now this is the key partner of the free world. But we always have to think about like maintaining strong partnership with the United States, Indo-Pacific partners, European partners on the one hand, but also have to manage China and Russia issues. They are just big neighbors, and that is very existential.
Professor, and can I follow up with one thing? Because you very nicely described the situation, security environment, and the new partnerships or continuation of the old partnerships you wanted to have. There's a lot of discussions in Europe. Much of it is probably coming from the pressure from the United States to pay more attention to Indo-Pacific. And if you were to give advice, Europeans, in terms of what would be something that Europeans can actually get involved more in Indo-Pacific that would actually have some practical, constructive, positive result, be it on some narrow issue like, I don't know, protection of undersea cables or maybe some technology issue. If you were advising Europeans to focus on something to get involved in the Indo-Pacific, what would that be?
Okay, I would say still Indo-Pacific is quite far away. I was welcoming from the other side of the Eurasian continent. I was welcoming the European outreach to Indo-Pacific, but we also have to keep in mind that their willingness. We have a lot of strategies and vision, but what are the actual common interests in the Indo-Pacific between Europe and Indo-Pacific countries, and especially Korea. One example that is more kind of Korea-specific issue, but for example, North Korea. North Korea was a threat, but very distant threat to European people for a long time. But North Korea is just a few hundred kilometers away. North Korea is fighting against Europe, the Ukraine, in Russian territory. So North Korea actually became the existential, the real security threat. On the other hand, South Korea is contributing to the defense industry and security preparedness of European countries. So yes, certainly security is getting connected. But we still lack a lot of practice. And still the risk is the strategic inconsistency. We are talking a lot about the common Indo-Pacific policy, NATO plus IP4. But for example, NATO's focus on Ukraine and Asia's focus on deterrence against China and North Korea can evolve separately. And that could leave a gap that authoritarian coordination want to exploit. So the answer is we have to close that gap. We need cross-regional habit of cooperation. I think this session is in that sense particularly meaningful. So we need to learn and practice how to solve the issues together. Well, security dialogue will be one thing. Maybe advanced level will be some sort of the kind of the common exercises. But I think especially the cybersecurity and that kind of more neutral but more common interest agenda should be tackled in the short run.
Excellent. We have also an opportunity to bring in questions from the audience. So if somebody wants to ask a question, please wave at me. I'll try to see through the lights as much as I can. I already have 2 hands recorded. I'll get back to you in 2 minutes. But before I do, I wanted to go back to the speakers with a bit of a different angle to the same question. Because if we talk about change in rules of the world order, if we're talking about fragmentation, inevitably it also creates opportunities. And maybe middle powers, middle-sized countries, actually the ones who paradoxically benefit not insignificantly if of course, they're doing the right things to grasp these opportunities and both position themselves or maybe create new rules for the world order. So I wanted to go very briefly to you with this round. Like, if you had to name what's the opportunity is right now for your country or in general for the world, what would be the thing that you would highlight?
No, thank you so much. I wouldn't call it, middle powers benefiting from this fragmenting world order, but I think, it really puts a responsibility on our shoulders to do something about it. Because, I think the big powers do not have the necessary appetite to do something about it, and the small powers are not sufficiently powerful enough to do something. So it really rests upon the middle powers like us to really push, the things in the right direction. And I don't know whether you've heard, an organization, an initiative called MICTA, which started about 10 to 15 years ago. And I'm so happy to be on the same panel with the 3 countries. MICTA is Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia. An initiative to bring middle powers from different parts of the world, but really quite like-minded. And, of course, we were all friends even before that, but we tried to turn this friendship into partnership. Partnership in my mind means not only friendship, but being able to do something in concrete terms for a common cause, for a common code of the whole humanity. And I think that's what we are doing. And the kind of agenda items that we are trying to deal with is UN reform, first of all, and also how to tackle the global challenges from a point of view of the middle powers. And we do that by initiating a security dialogue that Professor Lee pointed out. Because, from this security dialogue, what comes out is that, of course, we are all very much consumed by our own immediate problems, the regional wars and this and that. But when you are able to look at it in a more sort of a global perspective, you've found out that, I mean, climate change, for example, is a threat for all of us. The widening gap of digitalization between the developed and the developing world is even a more serious threat. Or the disruptive impact of advancing technology on modern warfare, including cyber warfare and cybersecurity, for example. These are probably more consequential, going to be more than anything else in the mid to long term for the future of our planet. So that is, I think, I mean, first and foremost, rather than trying to specify one or the other thing, this is the kind of thing that we need among the middle powers, a security dialogue, a sort of a partnership, and to take lead in certain areas in global institutions like UN or in our regional sort of formats and try to do something differently, try to bring some difference on the ground. So that's what I'm going to say as our priority from the Turkish point of view.
Sounds like BRICS, but for a different set of
Certainly
actors.
different, certainly different.
Yeah. Ambassador?
Look, I think we are stronger together, always. And wherever we can reinforce the truly multilateral system, we absolutely should do that. Where that is not possible, we shouldn't give up on the multilateral system, but perhaps it will be plurilateral or minilateral or bilateral. But building more and deeper relationships together with others across a breadth of areas of common interest is what I think we should all be seeking. And where you can connect those groups together to move from bilateral to minilateral to plurilateral to re-energize the multilateral, this is a great pathway. But today, in a fragmenting world, we have to try in all of the pathways, and we are stronger together.
Professor?
Okay, fragmentation is painful, but it forces innovation in governance, especially for the middle power countries who will uphold the international norms, international liberal, say, or institutional order. Would it be the big, just big powers? I would say this will be the moment where a lot of middle power together will have to work. And so this is a great learning period. This is a great learning period to act together, but without waiting for permission sometimes. And one example, the Korea and Poland built the defense partnership, and I think that is a good example. A commercial deal for defense industry that we have discussed well throughout the days, and especially this morning, has become a new pillar of Europe's rearmament. So these kind of modular networks are the silver lining in a disordered world. So we are finding new modus vivendi, but there is a condition, only when those countries are ready and those countries are proactive.
Great. Start talking to whoever you can, and then we can not quickly, but at some point scale up and diversify all the groups coming together. Let's start with the questions. I have a hand over there, and then I had a hand in the middle. If you could please raise them so that microphone can reach you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Richard Walker from Deutsche Welle. I'd like to ask the panelists about China's nuclear weapons expansion and the potential destabilizing impact of that. Obviously, there's been an ongoing debate about nuclear deterrence in Korea anyway. I'd like to ask for each of your views on that and its destabilizing potential. And is there anything that middle powers can do to try to change the calculation and planning that the Chinese have? Thanks.
Thanks so much. And for the sake of time, we'll take a few questions at a time. There was another hand somewhere in the middle. If we can get... Okay, somebody has the microphone. Go ahead.
Hello, Hanna Shellis, Ukrainian Prism. I have the question to our Korean colleague. When in December 2023 we were in Korea and were speaking about the first North Korean soldiers already being in Russia, that was the perception like, no, we are not involved. Europe is too far. We don't care. And we're afraid that Russia can spoil something here. 2 years later, we have 30,000 North Koreans already in the mid of Europe. Does it change the perception of South Korea? What type of the alliances it needs? That to be concentrated only on the regional alliances, Japan, yep, something around, is not any more relevant considering the threats that are really posing just transcontinental, that you cannot be at the different continent and feel that you're safe.
Perfect. Let's take these two questions at a time. You don't have to answer both. You can pick. So, Professor, you go first.
Okay. China's nuclear expansion is nothing new. China has expanded, especially in military terms, over the past decades. And technology-wise, do not underestimate the China's very rapid the growth in digital technology and other military satellite and technology. So the issue's been there. The rather it may for South Korea, how to, well, we have North Korea nuclear threat. That could be more imminent. We could have potential Chinese and Russian nuclear threat. So how to build the extended deterrence? Unless South Korea will go nuclear self-armament, which will be highly contested, but how to maintain and how to build a solid extended nuclear deterrence together with the United States and allies. So that, I guess that will be the foremost priority. And the second, related with that, what we are still pursuing denuclearization, or at least freezing the North Korean nuclear program. So in that sense, non-proliferation regime should be strengthened. But at this moment, one very kind of the dire things going on is not many people, and especially United States and all the key players, are paying sufficient attention to the proliferation issues. So we need to, and here, I would say the key stakeholders should be much keener on implementing properly the measures for non-proliferation. There are several measures to prevent the nuclear, especially the transfer of nuclear technology or nuclear the material. North Korean issues, yes, well, certainly that is a very serious issue. But I would say that would not dramatically change the partnership or alliance issues. We already, South Korea, already have participated in the, well, been standing in solidarity with Ukraine. I would rather say the more salient issue in Korea regarding North Korean dispatch to Russia is first, Russo-North Korea military ties and alliance got strengthened. North Korea, I would say, has been the biggest beneficiary of the Russo-Ukrainian war. They got the hard cash by dispatching soldiers. They got the technology transfer, missile technology and other satellite, but the key technology transfer from Russia allegedly. Plus, they are learning fast. Koreans are learning fast. North Korea is not an exception. North Korea is rapidly picking up the information and necessary tactics and technologies in dealing with the drone wars and other kind of the modern technologies. So that will increase both the conventional and non-conventional military threat potentially to South Korea. So we are very keen on that. We are closely following up that issue.
Ambassador, what can we do about Chinese nuclear?
Australia is concerned by the scale, the speed, and the sophistication across both the conventional and nuclear development of military and military-related capability in the People's Republic of China. Concerned because all of that is with a lack of transparency about intent. And we are not a nuclear weapon state. We have absolutely no intention of becoming a nuclear weapon state. We have a long and very proud history of being a signatory to the whole breadth of nuclear non-proliferation treaties and regimes. We are also an ally and have greatly appreciated our alliance relationship with the United States and the extended deterrent component of that relationship.
Minister?
I think both questions show how interlinked we are in terms of our security in Euro-Atlantic and Asia-Pacific regions, really. And I mean, I don't think we can turn a blind eye anymore to what is happening in different parts of the world, because nothing is local anymore. Everything is global in terms of the impact that it brings to the world. So, so I fully agree with what my two colleagues have said. I don't want to add too much, but I think with respect to China's nuclear program, it is very important because, I mean, nowadays, of course, I mean, when it comes to nuclear issues, we're talking about the new START, it's expiring next year, and how important it is for the US and Russia to come together and to find a way to extend this sort of strategic risk reduction talks. And I think it's going to be highly important to be able to bring China into the discussion as well, because, I mean, it's obvious that, I mean, the scale of nuclear weaponization that we see in China will become a very important matter in terms of the strategic risk discussion globally. I'm not only regionally, but globally as well. So that's my take on that. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Let's take a few more questions. There is a person with a microphone over there, and I need the microphones here to the front row as well.
Hello. First of all, I would like to greet and say thank you each and every speaker for the interesting panel. My question will be to Minister. Considering Turkey's increasing engagement in the South Caucasus and its support for regional initiatives like the Zangezur corridor, how does Ankara view NATO's potential role or limits in promoting stability in the region after the Karabakh conflict? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Let's get the microphone to the front row. If there are any other hands, please wave at me so that we can make sure we bring you in.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have a question for you, Professor. We see that how now Russia is a really big, strong allies with North Korea. North Korea supports Russia not only rhetorically, but on the battlefield, yeah, as you perfectly say. So my question is, what is your red lines about Russia-North Korea friendship? Because we understood that, yeah, Russia can pay by money, but of course, North Korea is interested in Russian military technologies. So, what's your red line? After that, your country will support Ukraine even more with armor, with ammunition, because we know that South Korean ammunition and technologies, military technologies now is really popular for Europe, for Poland, and I think also will be interesting for Ukraine.
Let's divide and conquer these two questions. So, Minister, you'll take the Turkey, and Professor will go back to you on the Korea.
Let me go first, if you like. I mean, yes, indeed. I mean, what we are seeing in the Caucasus, in South Caucasus right now, is very positive from our point of view, but I think from a more regional and global point of view as well. Because for the first time in the last 35 years, the Southern Caucasus has the real potential to become the linchpin between Europe and Asia in every sense of the world, in terms of transport corridors, in terms of trade routes, in terms of energy pipelines and whatnot. So I think we are very supportive of what is going on in the region. I mean, in terms of the peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, also, but in parallel with that, in terms of our own normalization efforts with Armenia. And both of them are going in the right direction. As you know, Azerbaijan and Armenia has already agreed on a draft peace agreement. There are just a few stumbling blocks for it to be signed very soon. And also in parallel, we are also working on our own normalization process with Armenia, and it's going quite well. I think in a very short period of time, you will see this region becoming fully normalized and changing the entire geostrategic landscape, not only of this region, but as I said, between Europe and Asia. So that's, I think in principle, how we approach that and how we try to support this process from our point of view. But as it comes to NATO's role in that, of course, as with all the other partners, I think NATO has a role and value added to bring into this with its own partnership, relations with both Armenia, Azerbaijan, and for that matter with Georgia as well. I think this region is so important that NATO cannot really, afford to be indifferent to. So I think in terms of defense reform, in terms of, capacity building, in terms of reaching an understanding on the pressing security issues, NATO's partnership with those countries are going to be very important in the years to come, especially when peace is solidified and when there is more lasting and sustainable peace and security in the region.
And Professor, on the red lines?
Okay, I guess they already passed the red line. But
So are you supporting Ukraine more?
the Russia-North Korea ties. Well, I think what they already passed the red line. But if we find a bit kind of thicker and darker red line, I would say. Then I would say a few things, especially regarding nuclear. One is Russian kind of a recognition and political support at an international level of North Korea as nuclear power, and bringing North Korea into that level, and giving kind of the political cheering. And a real red line is Russia working as a venue of actual nuclear proliferation, North Korean nuclear weapons or missile technology to Iran or other potentially the dangerous countries. So that would be the real red line, and very immediately, kind of the Russo-North Korea kind of military exercises in East Sea, and especially when they violate the flying zone or other kind of the border issue, that would be a real red line.
There are very thick red lines on the clock that we see here, so we'll need to start wrapping up. But I wanted to wrap up with you and go back with one question to everybody. Since we're now having a panel of responsible middle powers, I wanted you to highlight one action that you or your country can take in the upcoming year that would decrease fragmentation in the world. And please be warned, next year you'll have to come back here to Riga and we'll check how you did on your own commitments. So, Ambassador, let's start with Australia.
Look, I'd point to an interesting development with the intention of the European Union and the CPTPP community to establish a dialogue. And I know that Commissioner Šefčovič is going to be participating in a gathering of CPTPP delegates. And I think this is a really interesting example of one of those coming together, engaging opportunities across different groupings. I don't know where it'll go, but I'm pleased to see people are thinking about these innovative initiatives and opportunities to pursue new forms that encourage a world that can develop through trade, which has been so beneficial to so many hundreds of millions of people over these last decades.
And for those of us who do not know TPP,
you got to be kidding me. It's CPTPP, and I'll get one of my trade experts to get back to you on that.
Thank you so much, but we get the message, new creative forms of engagements that are blurring the domains and portfolios.
Yeah.
Professor?
Okay, the Indo-Pacific, I would say, it's not just a maritime term. The Indo-Pacific is a huge sea of emerging market and advancing technologies. Korea, Japan, also China, Taiwan, Singapore, and all those players are working on these technology issues. So, if European partners and Indo-Pacific partners are coordinating and cooperating, I would say maybe cyber and technology will be the two key domains we should make an instant move forward. So by next Riga summit, I'm pretty confident if we keep the right speed to move on, then the Cyber and Technology Alliance and Technology Cooperation will certainly increase the resilience of both regions to deal with growing uncertainty.
Right, that's another area where a lot of fragmentation is happening. And a quick update.
And just so you know, not only does Google tell me the answer, but my very good colleagues back in our embassy in Brussels have also told me the answer. And you'll understand why I can never remember it. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, trading relationship. Fantastic. Love it. And CPTPP just rolls off the tongue.
Bottom line, trade more with the countries in the region. And Mr. Minister, your action point.
I mean, I think apart from what we are trying to do in our own region, in terms of, for example, brokering a deal between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, which the first phase has just been agreed and Turkey has taken a very important part, or our attempts to host and facilitate the direct talks between Ukraine and Russia in order to reach a ceasefire and a lasting solution, and many others in our region. I'm just going to name two initiatives that we have started for more than 15 years ago. I mean, one of them is 20-year-old now, and one thing that we are hoping to do in the just next couple of years. The two initiatives are the Alliance of Civilizations and Mediation for Peace. Alliance of Civilization is an attempt under the auspices of the United Nations in order to fight against growing radicalism, extremism, racism, and xenophobia, which is unfortunately on the rise in global terms all around the world. I think that is a very important initiative, bringing almost every country from different parts of the world. And it has been now 20 years. It is working on, in media, women, youth, and digital sort of issues. I think it's a very important initiative in terms of trying to, fight against this fragmentation in the whole world. The second one is Mediation for Peace, which really focuses on, our capacity building efforts on conflict prevention. Rather than just crisis management, I think there is so much that we can do before the conflicts and crisis erupts. And that requires diplomacy, but that requires also some sort of expertise in mediation efforts. And that's what we are trying to do within that initiative, trying to build capacity in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, but particularly focusing on women and youth in order to bring the next generation of leaders from those countries in that area. And the third thing that I'm going to say, we're hoping to host the next climate conference, COP, in Turkey. But we're not trying to do it alone. We're hoping to do it together with Australia. Hopefully, we're still in discussions with that, but we're hoping to co-chair it with Australia. And the reason why is because, we both have a priority about the Pacific Island states. And no matter how it ended up between the two of us, I think the situation of the Pacific Island states, which are, of course, feeling the existential threat of climate change, is going to be so much important for both of our agendas. And I think that is also something, a country like Turkey, very much in Europe and Middle East, but also trying to also respond to the expectations of the countries in the Pacific Islands. So this is the kind of methods and initiatives that we are hoping to respond to this fragmentation.
These are excellent points, and they actually point out exactly to the areas where the big powers are either not interested to involve. Let's take climate or women's and youth issues, or in some areas, these are the areas where the big powers are growing further apart, if we take technology and cybersecurity. So thank you so much for doing that, and thank you so much for everybody who's been with us today. And remember, we'll have to check on these commitments a year from now back in Riga. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.